This has got to be the biggest and the most positive piece of news I've had since I've woke up, that someone is full-blown head-on going to take it to the authorities.
It should be done within 3 months. And in theory, we should be able to get a judgment in our hands that says that the national curriculum is illegal because they're not presenting the balanced representation of opposing views. And if that is the case, that will rewrite science. And that means that we don't have to attack all these globers on debates. It means that everything changes and it'll be done pretty much, well, the judgment will be done pretty much overnight.
Hi YouTube. In this video, I thought I would take a break from debunking and tell the entertaining tale of Flat Earthers' sleeping warriors' plan to make legal challenges to the UK education system. Why is this entertaining? Firstly, because it was such a silly idea in the first place, it was always impossible to take it seriously. But mostly because of the increasingly delusional claims that were made as the idea developed and the ease with which the Flat Earth community bought into this nonsense. Our story begins in late September 2018, when catchphrase king Nathan Oakley has an exciting announcement.
Anthony's had some very, very big and important news. About 6 months ago, Anthony was looking into getting some sort of information regarding to the heliocentric deception academically published, peer-reviewed, something that's official. And in order to do this, he's had to jump through a few hoops, and ultimately it's going to cost quite a substantial amount of money. That's something else I'll come on to later. We will be putting our hand out, cap in hand, going to the audience and saying this needs funding. So that will also follow. But that's the boring bit. The exciting bit is the task at hand. So I'm going to pass over to Anthony, who's hopefully going to give the audience a bit of detail about exactly what this is.
I was looking at different research, different research courses at higher level, and different universities do different things. And I found one that does what I want. And my intention is to try and get a pro-Flat Earth dissertation written that is peer-reviewed by my peers who are all solicitors or barristers in the profession, and basically criticise or challenge the law, the UK domestic law, on who is accountable for the national curriculum. I want to criticise the people that are in the education system on facts that we can prove are at least debatable in terms of the evidence, because they would have to prove the 93 million mile sun, for example, if they were going to show that their statements that we were being taught were actually true. And I don't know whether they can. Now, the risk with it, of course, is that it would be seen as being anti-establishment or somewhat unethical or whatever. There is a real risk that they may not actually accept it as a submission because of whatever reason they deem suitable ethically, morally. It could even class as terrorist, maybe. I don't know. I don't know what the position would actually be. We should be able to prove these things. It shouldn't be the case that I have to sit here week after week after week asking about the 93 million mile sun, because if the whole body of science is supporting this, where is it? I mean, one of the key things that makes this possible is the access to databases and resources that I currently don't have. When you go into any university establishment, you get access, you get login details, you can go onto the electronic resources databases, of which there are numerous ones. It's having that information, that knowledge, that stuff, which may well exist in science.
Registry.
But ultimately, it's without information, I wouldn't be able to know who's responsible for what we get taught. But the reason why I'm trembling a little bit is because I'm nervous, because it's serious. This is probably when if it doesn't get rejected and it gets accepted and then it gets passed and comes back out the other side, that's when it can be released to like the journals and stuff, because it will be the case that there's a credible argument for whether or not we're being told the truth. But it'll be reviewed in or published in different journals as well later on down the line. Not straight away, but once it comes back out the other side. And it'll generate discussion, awareness, promotion. Flat Earth might benefit massively just from the exposure from it.
So the amount that you're going to be asking for in terms of the fundraiser is $2,050, is that correct?
The course fees are $2,050. There is an admin fee of $50, and I think it's going to be. I need to find out what the final figure is. I believe the final figure is just over 2,000, let me restate the risks. I mean, the risks are, because it's very political by nature, the real risk is that it'll be rejected. And I can't guarantee that it'll be submitted, but it may get stopped. And if it does get stopped for some nonsense reason, then that tells people within Flat Earth that you can't challenge the establishment, in my opinion. But there is the real risk that this may not actually happen, in terms of the university in question may stop it.
So a deluded and entitled Anthony thinks the fact that people haven't delivered evidence relating to the distance to the sun to him on Oakley's game show is a good reason to think that there is no such evidence. Of course, like everything in Flat Earth these days, e-begging is required.
There was a suggestion that that Anthony did exactly the same as Ranty, but at the time he was umming and ahhing about doing this, and the idea had been on the table for a while. It was just purely down to the fact that it's such an expensive thing to do.
I mean, I did consider doing a GoFundMe for a P1000 because a lot of people were doing it and gifting away the P900s, and I did think of doing it. But really, I wanted to do this instead because I think this has got more value to it and it's got more legs. And although I don't really resent anybody for wanting the P1000, for me, this is like a P2000.
So it seems Anthony decided he was going to raise money through GoFundMe donations before he had decided what worthy need these donations were for. I think these clips provide some insight into Anthony's real motivation for this project.
But this is where it gets really interesting, right? Because the ballers all say things like, well, you don't have any peer-reviewed papers. And obviously that we can then go, hey, there's peer review, guys. Read it and weep. Ultimately, the fact that it's been peer-reviewed gives us that leverage against the ballers who basically challenge us and say you've got nothing. There's not a single troll that would be able to challenge any part of it because none of them are qualified. Not even, dare I say it, the rumpus. Because I just want something that's peer-reviewed that the ballers then can't say that we've got nothing because, hey, chew this, guys, because most of them won't even be able to read it, let alone like understand it.
Actually, Anthony is right there. The final product is such gibberish it is hard to understand. So the GoFundMe page is set and Oakley makes Anthony an advert.
But yeah, if and when we do that, it'll be in the next few days, if not today. Check out Anthony's Sleeping Warrior-a-thon, where he'll disseminate quite a lot more information about what he's doing, why he's doing it, and what support he requires. So one last time, I'll put a link to my video advert for that campaign in the super chat, in the chat.
I have a rare opportunity to get a legal, peer-reviewed pro-Flat Earth dissertation into the education system at the highest of levels, and although it won't be blatantly the Earth is flat, it will be critically challenging the national curriculum with regards to how reliable and credible the tuition the children of today are actually being taught is. I currently have an undergraduate degree in law with honours, and it's a qualifying law degree. I've furthered my studies with a postgraduate diploma in legal practice. I want to write a master's degree level paper and submit it for the dreaded peer review by my legal peers, not science, legal. My tutor is a practicing barrister and not just any old teacher. This is the big league.
Anthony sets off on a fundraising frenzy, popping up all over the place to make increasingly absurd claims about the apparent global reach of a university dissertation.
I'm one of a few people in England that has an undergraduate degree in law and then a postgraduate diploma in legal practice. Science is subject to the law. The peers that will be reviewing my work are solicitors, barristers, and high up qualified people that are more qualified than me. And I would assert and argue that they are more qualified than science. It'll create loads of awareness and probably national interest, but it'll generate massive amounts of discussion and awareness, hopefully, if I can get it published in a science journal. But then I can also set that same document in terms of the legal journals, because once it comes back out the other side, or even just national press, once national press get wind of it, that it's gone through the other side, it will generate discussion. Because it's so contentious, it's got legs to go potentially around the world, if one prefer a better phrase, because it's contentious. Well, I would be seriously credible in academia, wouldn't I? In theory, I would then be able to get access to write papers, put them into journals, because I would be credited in law, and it'll be critically acclaimed. So I'll submit it to Nature and see what Nature say, but it won't be their field because it's not law. But they might run it, they might not do. But I'll push it and see what happens. And I only need one or two of them to publish it, and then I'm away. I think they'll try and discredit and bury it. To be honest, it's like it's blowing the whistle, isn't it? It'll be seen as whistle blowing. They'll not want that to be going out there. Like Julian Lestrange might end up living in Russia or something like that.
This pays off for Anthony, as the internet's most gullible line up to stuff their hard-earned cash down the drain that is Anthony's crappy idea. Within a few days, the money is raised, and a few days after that, Anthony starts the course.
Basically, I've done my first lecture today, and I've found out some things that are really pretty cool, and I wanted to share them because, basically, the ballers are not going to like it. The teacher comes in and she introduces herself. She starts describing about what she expects from us and how we're to progress through the course. She basically said, "So, what have you got any ideas for what you want to do your work on?" So it starts getting political now, right? Because I've got to do the overlap with law. So it's not necessarily about the physics. It's more to do with where the law fits into it. So I obviously said, I think that the education system that we get taught from the national curriculum from the age of about 10 or so is not necessarily based on facts. It seems to be based on a consensus rather than facts. And the overlap with law is that I think that we have the right to be taught the truth. And she came back to the question, well, where does this overlap with law? And I said, well, the Education Act tells us and others what their obligations are with regards to education. And I said, and that's what I'm here to argue. I'm here to critically analyse the current thinking on a topic of my choice. And I said, and I'm pretty certain that the solar system, the way we're taught it at the age of about 10, isn't actually fact. It's a consensus that everybody seems to believe, but it's not actually factual. Anyway, the outcome that I learned today, and much to the ballers discussed, is that I have the choice, and the university will do it for me if I wish to, which I will be doing, for it to be published in a law journal. And once it goes published in the law journal, in addition to being marked by the exam board, that just means I don't have to publish it, but they will do it for me. Now, that's great, because that's the peer review part, is like not just peer review by my peers, but peer review by like the law profession itself. And obviously, there's going to be that overlap with so-called science. And basically, this is where I'm going to really get the ballers all tied up, because I'm going to poke the bear towards the end of it once it's submitted, and then I get the link for it to go on the journals, and it gets released as a journal. I'm going to basically point the finger at the ballers and make sure that they all go and view it from the website. And then the minute it starts creating internet traffic, I don't know exactly how it'll work, but I'm pretty sure that things that start trending will start to gain momentum. And that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that I am literally going to be the cat amongst the pigeons. And she concluded by saying, well, what is the law that you're going to be challenging? And I said, it's going to be to do with the obligations of the state. Like, what are we going to get taught? I said, I don't know what they are yet. I haven't researched it. I said, but I know it'll be there somewhere. She started to, her words were, I'm not quite sure which mentor I should give to you. I'll have to have a think about that one. And then she was like, we're going to have a chat about that. Make sure that we're going down the right way. And I was like, yeah, that's right. Let's see how this goes, because this is where it's going to get a bit awkward. So it's interesting anyway.
I mean, Ranty said earlier, it depends if you get on the course. He's on the course, his foot's in the door, he's slipped under the radar, and not only that, the teacher's interested. She's obviously recognised there's a little bit of mystery about what you're telling her.
Yeah, a little bit of devious.
Devious, I think, is correct. The next day, Anthony hears from his tutor.
Cool.
But I've got to do
well received then. Well received initially, not too.
Well, I've had an email back and forth with her since yesterday. And the only thing that she's concerned about is that it appears that it may be a little bit the angle, she said, may not be as strong. The angle of attack, interestingly named, may not be as strong as what it needs to be for the point. And I'm like, well, in that case, let's find the angle. Let's make that angle so that it's strong enough.
That's what you've said as well, hasn't it? You wanted to get a bit of databasing and try and find some argument in law.
I've got to make the angle, and that's where I've got to really show that this works and persuade her that there's enough in it. Because if she thinks at the minute that it might be a too shallow angle of a point of law, then there's not going to be that much to write about, in her opinion, at this point. Well, you and I know that you could write 12,000 words pretty easily on not having to do very much. in terms of like curvature and stuff like that. So it's not right to say that there's only a shallow angle in law. It's just I don't think she's really understood the depth of it yet.
Yes, how can Anthony's paper have too shallow an angle in law if he can write thousands of words about curvature? It's at this point that Anthony first notices the very benevolent Flat Earth Street activist Roxanne Glenn, and in an effort to impress her, he embarks on some activism of his own, after making this important discovery.
If I said to you guys, do you think we'd ever get Flat Earth into the mainstream schools? What would your answer be?
I would consider it extremely unlikely / impossible with the current paradigm we've got.
What if I told you guys that there's a right in law that we can exploit, that if we didn't know it was there, we would never exploit, but now we can? And it came from the result of 2 GoFundMes, one that involved me, one that involved another group, blending together to create this outcome that is enshrined in law, and it's going to be piloted soon. And I'm now going to show you how this has come about. The local education authority, governing body being Board of Governors, and head teacher, but notice that there's no teacher mentioned, must stop the pursuit of partisan political activities by any of the pupils at a maintained school. And they must also stop the promotion of partisan political views in the teaching of any subject. Mm-hmm. Now, I think I can get in, or I'm going to get in, an argument to say that the heliocentric argument for the ball of space and all that, so orbiting the sun and all that, I'm going to argue that that is partisan political within the meaning of the definition of partisan political from the case that I'm about to go through. The local education authority, the governing body, the Board of Governors, and the head teacher must take steps that are reasonably practicable to secure that where political issues are brought to the attention of the pupils whilst in attendance at a maintained school, a state school, that the pupils are offered a balanced presentation of opposing views.
So would you say Flat Earth is political?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, John. And morning,
we're going to come back to that.
Mark, Mark, at this point, would your input on Flat Earth as a qualifying criteria for political issue?
Yeah, I'm not sure it would qualify as political. It's more scientific to my thinking.
I'm working on the concept that it is political, and it's whether or not it's partisan political or not. And I'll come into it. It's the next clip, but just bear with me for the minute, because if it is considered political, then this applies. If it's not considered political, then I've not got a paper. So it has to be considered political for the purpose of the paper. But point 9, it says, there's the actual legislation, which I would never, ever have found unless I had this GoFundMe, which got me on the course that gave me access to this. Okay.
So Anthony is referencing a part of the UK Education Act which only applies to political issues, but he believes he can apply this to the teaching of, as he puts it, heliocentricity, despite the fact that this is very obviously not a political issue. By the way, despite Anthony's repeated bullshit assertions to the contrary, everything he references throughout this video is easily available for free online, as we would expect with any part of UK law or with a high-profile court case. Anthony is now going to talk about such a court case, Dimmock versus the Secretary of State for Education and Skills. Before you get his weird, distorted understanding of it, here are the facts. In 2007, the UK government announced it would distribute a copy of Al Gore's climate change documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, to all UK secondary schools as part of their Sustainable Schools Year of Action, an event to promote sustainable development and environmental consciousness. The film was accompanied by guidance notes and resources on how climate change fits into the context of the national curriculum and the Sustainable Schools Year of Action programme. The film's distribution was opposed by Christopher Monckton, 3rd Viscount Monckton of Brenchley, a prominent British global warming denier, a repeatedly discredited and notorious bullshitter who will be familiar to Potholder 54 fans. With the backing of an unnamed wealthy friend, Monckton served papers on the government in the name of Stuart Dimmock, who was a member of the same small political party as Monckton and a parent of 2 secondary school children. Monckton's role remained secret until some time after the case. The plaintiffs argued that showing the film would violate Section 406(1)(b) of the Education Act. The Act requires that local education authorities, school governing bodies and head teachers shall forbid the promotion of partisan political views in the teaching of any subject in the school. They also argued that showing the film was unlawful because it did not provide a balanced presentation of opposing views, as required by Section 407 of the Act. Dimmock petitioned the court for an injunction to prevent the government from showing an inconvenient truth in English schools. The judge ruled that the film was largely scientifically accurate and could still be shown in schools. However, the accompanying guidance notes had to be amended to specifically highlight 9 inaccuracies, where the judge deemed that the movie had departed from the mainstream view. A couple of important points to note about this case. The plaintiffs argued an inconvenient truth was political because, quote, Mr. Gore promotes an apocalyptic vision which would be used to influence a vast array of political policies, including fiscal policy and the way that a whole variety of activities are taxed, including fuel consumption, travel and manufacturing, investment policy and the way that governments encourage directly and indirectly various forms of activity, energy policy and the fuels, in particular nuclear, employed for the future, foreign policy and the relationship held with nations that consume and or produce carbon-based fuels. These arguments were not opposed by the defendant, who agreed the film was political. Because this point was not opposed, the judge said, the defendant does not challenge that the film promotes political views. There is thus no need to consider any analysis or definition of the word political. This is important because Anthony will frequently imply and claim that the judge did define the word political, often switching it or combining it with the word partisan, which the judge defined as simply one-sided. Okay, now for Anthony's weird, distorted view of the case. First, he establishes how teaching of heliocentrism is political.
And there's a case. It's R against the Secretary of State for Education and Skills of 2007. So this is going to draw the line in the sand for everybody. So whether it's partisan or not, whether it's political or not, all the scenario that we're talking about is all in this case. Now, it's to do with Al Gore's video of 2007 or 2006, An Inconvenient Truth About Global Warming, how the end of the world is nigh unless we do major things. But the issue was, is it actually political or not? And this is where it says about political. It says, this video was considered that it was political in that it argued that global warming was caused by man and that urgent and, if necessary, expensive and inconvenient steps had to be taken to counter it. Well, we can paraphrase that with an equivalence. So we could argue that the need for the national curriculum to teach just one area of the heliocentric argument is a man-made decision, and it's not reflecting the views of the other views, be it concave or whatever. And on that basis, paraphrasing this into something similar can be done. And therefore, I would say that would make the heliocentric application in the national curriculum political, because it's the absence of everything else that's not in there that really should be in there. And that, I would say, that would satisfy the definition of political.
What complete and utter bollocks. First, Anthony's paraphrasing was basically him replacing the passage with one of his own invention and an entirely different meaning. He then argues that teaching is political because of, quote, the absence of everything else that isn't in there that should be in there. Basically arguing that it is political because it is one-sided, conflating political with the judge's definition of partisan. Obviously, everything that is taught as a fact is by definition one-sided. He also completely ignores all of the arguments that we have just seen that were presented to establish that an inconvenient truth was political. Of course, it would be impossible for Anthony to present similar arguments to these with respect to anything taught in the science curriculum. Not that he even tried. We can find a complete clarification of how the Education Department interprets the word political in this document, which provides guidance to the UK's independent schools to ensure they are compliant with general educational standards. Section 320 tells us, the aim of this provision is to prevent the political indoctrination of pupils through the curriculum, The wording is based on Section 4061B of the Education Act 1996, which applies to maintained schools. As explained below, the aim is not to prevent pupils from being exposed to political views or from discussing political issues in school. Pupils should not, however, be actively encouraged by teachers or others to support particular political viewpoints. Then in Section 321, the following is how the department interprets the following two key terms in the provision. The interpretation of partisan is taken directly from the judgment in the Dimmock case. The interpretation of political views is political views, views expressed with a political purpose. A political purpose includes actions taken either directly or indirectly to further the interests of a particular political party, to procure changes to the laws of this or another country, to procure the reversal of government policy of particular decisions of governmental authorities in this or another country. So when a teacher tells a student that the distance to the sun is 93 million miles, Anthony would need to show where within this statement is one of these political purposes. Finally, returning to the Dimmock case, Anthony completely misses this argument made in defence of the government and supported by the judge. Scientific hypotheses, such as the hypothesis that climate change is mainly attributable to man-made emissions of greenhouse gases, do not themselves constitute political views within the meaning of Section 407, even if they are doubted by particular political groups. But in any event, nothing in the 1996 Act or elsewhere obliged teachers to adopt a position of studied neutrality between, on the one hand, scientific views which reflect the great majority of world scientific opinion and, on the other, a minority view held by a few dissentient scientists. The judge agreed with this, saying, "Of course that is right, and Section 406 and 407 are not concerned with scientific disputes or with the approach of teachers to them." So Anthony's precedent case that will form the entire legal content of his dissertation specifically states that the laws he is trying to apply do not apply to scientific hypotheses. However, Anthony seems to think the case is made for flat earthers.
Number one, the word partisan had to be construed as meaning one-sided. Regardless of what the dictionary says, it just means one-sided. So in terms of heliocentrism, I would argue that that's absolutely a one-sided point because, you know, they don't teach anything about geocentrism, or no one knows about hollow earth theory or flat earth theory. It's absolutely one-sided.
I fish this next bit out again. You did this on Nathan's show. This is the best bit for me.
The next bit says, the misleading use of scientific data, misrepresentations, and half-truths, and one-sidedness. Again, that's all about heliocentricity in science. It fits into it completely. So it's like, oh my God, that's been written for us. And it wasn't. It was written for Al Gore's thing. But this is what the judges said. And heliocentricity is all about the misleading use of scientific data, misrepresentations, and half-truths. The second one states that the deployment of material in such a way as to prevent pupils from meaningfully testing the veracity of the material and forming an independent understanding as to how reliable it was. Well, the minute you mention the word reliable, instantly you're thinking of the likes of NASA and anything to do with space. You can't test the veracity of any of the material it is sent to because it's completely one-sided and you can't test it. But also, independent understanding as to how reliable NASA is not taught. And there is no ability for that in schools for NASA. So this second part, forming an independent understanding as to how reliable it was. Has anybody ever formed an independent understanding as to how reliable anything was that you were taught at school? And the answer is no, because you're not taught to critically analyze anything. So that in itself is an issue. But that's only the second factor. Let's move to the third. And this is glorious. Think about Neil deGrasse Tyson and Brian Cox and co. The exaltation of protagonists and their motives, coupled with the demonization of the opponents, that would be us, and our motives. Isn't that just exactly what Neil deGrasse does and co? So the issue then is whether or not it's promoted, right? And subjectively, you can think to yourself, is heliocentricity promoted in schools? right? Whether it's partisan or not, is it promoted? Of course it is. There's a globe in every classroom. There's a globe on every wall. Everybody knows that globe's there. Everyone's heard about it, right? It's definitely promoted. It's not been given equal, like a fair amount, like say, well, there is opposing views. There could be alternative explanations. It is contentious. Not everybody agrees. It's taught as fact. The second point that the judge said, the mere distribution by the Secretary of State to schools, which is basically the same as saying teaching heliocentricity in this case, to facilitate their showing of the film and accompanied by guidance was not, per se, on the face of it, or irremediably a promotion of the partisan political views. The statute could not possibly mean that Section 406 was breached whenever a partisan political film was shown to pupils. What was forbidden by the statute was political indoctrination, which is what you've just said. That's the bit that's forbidden. Indoctrination. It's not the showing of the clip. It's not the teaching of heliocentricity. What is forbidden is the indoctrination of, which is where the continuous, basically, reassertion of the solar system and the heliocentric model is the indoctrination. Anyway, so
since this is the biggest lie that covers all the rest, I think we're starting in the right spot, my friend, for sure.
Now, this is the bit that's important because it says, therefore, a teacher who in the course of a school day, as part of the syllabus, which it is, presents to his pupils with the appropriate setting and with proper tuition, but look at this bit, and debate a film or document or topic, maybe heliocentricity, which itself promoted in a partisan way some political view, could not possibly be the mischief against which the statute was intended. So what they're saying is teachers are generally going to fall outside. And I think that's right, because the average teacher, yeah, he might have a degree, but let's be honest, he's reciting that which he was taught to kids. He's never really thought about it because he's done his degree, and no disrespect to anybody with a degree, but at the end of the day, the bottom line is if you've got the degree, you're gonna parrot back that which you were taught by the teacher that you remember the most fondly in your chosen matter of, teaching, right?
I was hoping you were going to put a link to where that document is.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Which document?
The one I'm looking at.
It's not something that I can link because the link expires because it's a database that you've got to be registered through the university to get. This is what we pay the fees for. This is not. That's why I've got it on screen so you can read it. It's from Halsbury's Laws, and you can't get to it without paying. That's why I've put it on screen.
I wanted to know. See it. Yeah.
And that's the second point. So the third and final point that the judge said in this case, in order to comply with the requirements of 406 and 407 of the 96 Act, the Secretary of State, when actively distributing the film, or in this case teaching heliocentricity, has to make clear that some or all of the matters contained therein were not supported or promoted by him, and there was a view to the contrary. Now, even if he thinks that heliocentricity is right, and he probably does, really, he should be telling people that they're not necessarily supported or promoted by him. But if he thinks it's right, he's not going to say that, is he?
Well, I did say it was weird and distorted. Now, how does Anthony plan to use all this for flat Earth activism?
Now, this is the second part of it. This is to do with the activism. So this is where the result of my GoFundMe overlaps with the result of another group's GoFundMe, which was to do with the tour. Adam was part of it in Nottingham, to do with Roxanne, the globalist denier, and her troops. So the second part of it, the 909 bit, which was the second paragraph, states, the local authority, governing body, and the head teacher must take reasonable steps to secure that. And this is the bit where political issues, flat Earth, are brought to the attention of pupils that are in attendance at the school. The pupils are offered a balanced presentation of opposing views. So even if I can't get in, if I can't argue that it's partisan political from the point of law, which is going to form most of my argument, I am going to be able to argue that all we've got to do as flat earthers is bring these political issues to the attention of the pupils whilst they're in attendance at a school, and then the headmaster, because it says so here, the headmaster must take reasonable steps to secure that the pupils are offered a balanced presentation of opposing views. That is our way into the schools, because all we've got to do is bring it to their attention and then prove to the head that we've done it, because there'll be flyers going around the school and all the kids will be talking about it, because that's what'll happen in a school. Once we bring it to their attention, the headmaster must take reasonable steps to ensure that the kids are offered a balanced presentation of opposing views. We're in. Now, brilliant. I didn't know I didn't know about this until I did until I got the GoFundMe results, and I did what I'm doing now. And Roxanne and Harry and Robin and all the people on her side, they got the benefit of a GoFundMe as well. And there's an overlap, and that overlap gives us the way into the schools. But in this particular case, I've found that there is something enshrined in law that gives us the right to be able to get a balanced presentation of opposing views into the schools. And all we've got to do is bring it to the attention of the pupils. So in terms of the activism, I said to Roxanne and Harry and the other guy, Jason, I said, was it an efficient use of your time to get to maybe 300, 400 people over the whole duration of the tour, when you could do it all in one classroom or one hallway, and it's a captive audience? So it's like, this is the next step in the activism. If there's activism to be done, this is how we should do it. We should trigger this law by bringing the issues to the attention of the pupils whilst they're in school, and then asking the headmaster, governing body, and the local authority to ensure that they take reasonable steps to ensure that the pupils are offered a balanced presentation of opposing views. And that, Your Honour, is the law.
No, that is an absurd misunderstanding of the law. Anthony actually thinks that all he has to do is hand out a few Flat Earth flyers to school children, and this will trigger a legal requirement that they be taught Flat Earth bullshit in school. But his fantasy doesn't end there.
What I suggested was, imagine that, just say for instance, me and Adam, right? I go down the left-hand side, Adam goes down the right-hand side. We both got Bluetooth wireless microphones on, and we look like we're BBC. We've got a battery pack connect to us, and they can see it, and it's very visual that we're proper. And basically, imagine that we had a back and forth, like in a courtroom, and the guy in the blazer is the judge, but he stood behind his pulpit and he's got the black gown on with the horsehair hat on, and he's acting as the role of the judge. You could get all the kids to stand up immediately at the beginning and get them all to stand up while all rise for the judge, or blah, and make it a courtroom. And then someone says, "All be seated." And it's formal, but the kids do it because they know that will stick with them for the rest of the days, because there was that thing that happened with the court thing. They'll remember that. But let's just say that Adam plays the part of the heliocentric teacher, right? We'll call him Mr. Meakin, because Mr. Meakin teaches physics, and Mr. Meakin can start presenting to the judge some of the strongest evidences for the heliocentric model, so that Aristophanes thing sticks in the ground, or gravity, or whatever. And I can be the disruptive guy that says, "Objection, Your Honour," and then the judge would say something like, "On what grounds?" And I say, "It's complete fabrication. You can't even prove Aristophanes even existed." If we can give it a theatrical appearance to it, and it's more entertainment. Well, obviously, we're going to need some hardware, because I think it's one thing to get permission to use the hall so that we can present our balanced views. But I think it's quite another thing to expect to use their Elecki and their equipment and all that kind of stuff. So I think we're going to have to at least have our own equipment in case they say, "Yeah, you can come in, but you're not using our stuff." So there might have to be a hardware purchase of speakers, microphones, that kind of stuff. But in the short term, literally, I'm talking with Roxanne, obviously, because of the success of the Global Eye tour.
So Anthony not only believes he can trigger a legal requirement to teach Flat Earth in schools, he seems to think he will personally be called upon to do the teaching. He goes on to develop this idea with Roxanne the Globalist Denier and Robin from the channel Lifting the Lid.
I'm a member of FE Core, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is the FE Core chat. And in this chat, there's 42 people. And the people that are in here, if I show more names, look at the people that's in here. We are the players in Flat Earth.
Mm-hmm.
All the big people are in here, right? This is going to create even more controversy, but this is good for FE Core. This is good for us. This is terrible for ballers.
Yeah.
Now the ballers will attack even more if FE Core are involved in this. We will make ourselves massive targets for so much troll abuse.
Anthony was saying the Bluetooth mic and it looking all professional. And then Jason started talking about hiring equipment until we work out what equipment we need. But it was about it being high tech and cool for the kids.
I think that if we all wore a pair of black pants, a pair of shoes, and a t-shirt, a polo neck t-shirt, that's smart casual enough for kids, but it's not underdressed for adults. I think it's in the middle. And I think if we've got that headset, that makes us look trick modern-wise. And I think that resonates with kids if we look good. Well, the thing is, this will go national. If we talked about the press last night, and I said that we should probably black them out in the short term, because we won't need the press for it to go national. It will go national by virtue of the kids and Facebook and Twitter.
The havoc this is going to cause with the kids when they go home is going to be fucking insane.
And this is why it's got to be hard hitting. I mean, we only get an hour.
Oh my gosh, we could recreate a court situation.
Yeah.
Where
me and you could have the fight.
Side, I'm the other side, and you're the judge, and the audience is the jury.
Yeah, and then basically you get like an auctioneer's gravel and like, order, I can sort this.
The kids at the end to tell them to vote. Are you still a globe head or what?
Yeah. Wow, I like it.
We could put a couple of teachers on the block as well. We could say, well, isn't that what Mr. Such and Such says?
So if we're going to do this, I think that we do have to we have to get funding for the equipment to make it look good. And I think that we'll probably get FE Core to probably get some kind of help involved in the equipment for the PA and stuff, because they've got stuff like that. Whether they've got it in England or not is another matter. But if it does look good, sound good, and it works with the kids for an hour, schools may actually pay to get you there before other schools because they want to see it. I guess ultimately that we're kind of like pioneering the next stage of activism, I think. I don't think they're qualified to teach the opposing view. But I think that we could really make that opposing view really interesting in such a way that the schools actually would appreciate it and give us good feedback from it, because I don't think that they would say no. And it could actually be like a road show with a commercial aspect to it where you actually charge for it.
There is going to be a couple of schools, I think, that are just definitely going to not play ball, and they need to be reminded that there's a legal loophole here. Constructive activism, taking it into the indoctrination centres, taking it right to the heart of the next generation where they are 5 days a week. So, yeah, I think it's fair to say we're going to bully our way into the education centres and at least get an hour of the students' time to show them that, you know, there's another point of view. It's not just a heliocentric model.
I think that they've long had the monopoly of the attention of the students, and I think that those days are numbered.
Yeah.
And I think now that we realise that there is a way for us to what's the word, infiltrate, then I think that we'd be mad not to, because it's enshrined in law and we can do it. And I've got every intentions of doing exactly that. And I think that you guys are going to have to do something really interesting to stop us, because it's in law that we're allowed to do it. We're going to do it. And gone are the days where heliocentricity is the only thing taught in schools.
Notice that this idea not only requires funding, but Anthony thinks schools are actually going to pay to see this presentation. The children of England are safe for the time being, though, because it seems Anthony has been operating above his pay grade, and his boss is about to find out about his cold moonlighting activities.
But you're right, the heliocentric model is a reification fallacy, because it is based on, or it's treated as though it's true. It's not. I mean, there's loads of things that's wrong with it. So the bottom line is that I think the next 12 months is going to be really interesting, because, I mean, I think, like I say, the activism is going to step up a couple of notches, and I've got some really cool irons in the fire at the minute, and I'm hoping that I can use the sway of being in academia to influence some people in positions of authority to give me some time. And if we can do something productive and constructive, I think we'll get this law implemented, and I'm hoping that it's going to go exceptionally well. So I'm looking forward to the next 12 months.
Well, no, I'm just saying that there are people saying, you know, talking about this idea of, they call it going into the schools, and they're kind of suggesting that some of us think that we're going to go in there and say, oh, the earth is flat and here it is, here's your picture, and here's your anyway.
When you say there are some of us, are you talking about people against us or with us?
Dell's latest one, he's talking about, these guys are talking about going into schools and they're going to go in there, and he's just blah, 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 blah. And he kind of brought up, you know, with pictures and cartoons. Like, I mean, I would hope that nobody here is of the mindset that we, you know, when we talk about going into schools, and it's quite a very broad, undetailed concept.
I don't think those words have ever crossed anybody's lips, going into schools.
No,
well,
I mean,
I've said going into schools, yeah, because that's the description that you would be doing by doing what I'm suggesting, but not going into schools as a flat earther saying that the earth's flat. Absolutely not.
Right. All right. I just wanted to, like, I think that's an interesting topic.
No. Sorry. Hold on, Eric. Sorry. No. Okay. There is going to be no point that Anthony walks into a school. So if that's been wrapped up contextually incorrect, then that needs to be made clear. Nobody's walking into any school.
It depends on what you mean by that, Nathan. It depends on what the context is that the criticism is as well. The intention is to get into the schools and present the opposing balanced view against the heliocentric model.
You're not about to walk into a school with a flat Earth model or any model or anything or any information for that matter and say anything to anybody in a school. But by the virtue that you are looking at the education system, that directly is linked. It is the school. It's the overriding entity that governs the school, but it doesn't mean you're going into a school physically going to put boots on the ground in a school ever.
I still think it's an argument from ignorance on the basis that I don't think that he understands the point that's being made, and then just repackaging it in his own slur kind of thing.
But you might very well be talking about someone else, and if someone is proposing going into a school and talking about bloody azimuthal equidistant global projection and saying it's the flat Earth, then they need a good slap. That's not what you should be doing. That's their system. You've got to be very careful.
Yeah, I think if Del was critical in some way, and I suggest it's because he's probably speaking from a position of ignorance, join the show and then have the conversation, Del, because I don't mind explaining myself just for your benefit if you don't understand what's going on.
Phew. Luckily, Anthony is an accomplished compulsive liar and managed to bluff his way out of that one. But now that Oakley has poured his urine on Anthony's activism bonfire instead of drinking it, Anthony needs a new approach. But first, a little revisionist history.
For those that don't know him, he's been very prevalent in a lot of debates, Flat Earth debates that are hosted live with Nathan Oakley's channel, Nathan Oakley 1980. But more recently, one of his good friends and him took a great photo across the Irish Sea from St. Bees to the Isle of Man, and with a couple of his friends did some fantastic modelling using CAD software and reverse engineered where the curvature should be. And it became quite a landmark discovery and an experiment that has since stood the test of time with all the debates. So big tip my hat to you, Anthony, for doing that, and with Ranty and the other guys.
Just a few minor corrections to be made to that story. Anthony claimed he could see Scotland, then he claimed he could see Ireland. He lied about his location for weeks until he was undone by his own evidence. Then he, Oakley and Ranty announced to the Flat Earth community that they could see the coast of Ireland from England, and consequently the debate was over. 2 weeks later, they quietly admitted that this was wrong, but appeased the flatties with the promise of a working Flat Earth model. This turned out to be a model of a tiny 30-mile section of the Earth, and it didn't work at all. In fact, it convinced its creator that the Earth wasn't flat, and he promptly vanished. Okay, back to the podcast.
But more recently, he's come across something which we'd like to share with you tonight and on this podcast, which is fascinating. And I've titled this podcast Hijacking the Education System, because it is exactly that. And I'm super excited to introduce you today. So, Anthony, welcome to the podcast.
Hello. I came to Flat Earth through looking at the pyramids. I realised that the pyramids were not tombs, and the pyramids overlapped with my background in law. But essentially, there's so much that comes from this Dimmock case that it's written. It's written for me to find it. I know it sounds bizarre, but it's as if there's some divine intervention that put this there at some point because I was going to find it at some point. Wow. Now, that won't make me any kind of self-proclaimed messiah, but when you read through the factors that Dimmock presented by the judge in hand at the time, it's almost as if he was a flat earther. That's how strong it's written. It's as if he's not talking about this case in question. It's as if he's talking about us right now. And when I read through this, It shivers down my spine because it's written for us. This is our law, and this is the angle that I've now found, and this is where it starts to get really interesting.
I'm super excited that you see it that way, Anthony.
Yeah.
So let's move forward then. Take us down the next step.
So I'm a member of FE Core, and because I'm a member of FE Core, I ran this by FE Core, and I said, look, this is our in. This is what we need to do if we want this to get forward. So I wrote to the government and I said, look, this is what the law says. This is what you're doing. It breaches the law because And if we take this matter to a judge and you guys have got to present your evidence on a table to the judge and satisfy the judge that you can prove things like the distance to the sun, that you can prove things like gravity. We know that they can't prove orbits. We know that they can't prove the center of the earth being a molten iron core. We know that they can't prove curvature. They can't prove axial rotation. All of these things are on the table for a judge to decide whether in law or not it's enough evidence to prove the point that they're making. Now, if we were to do this, I said to Effie Core, this is the single biggest, most, what's the word I'm looking for, devastating. And I'm not sure what the word is, but the magnitude of this is potentially huge because it only takes that one judge to look at their claim and say, yeah, you guys can't prove this. So I wrote to the government and I had a response back from this guy called B. Bickerton. But one of the things that he said was that the orbit around the sun is an established scientific fact, and therefore we do not see any need to review the content of the science curriculum. Well, how are they going to prove this scientific fact that the Earth orbits the sun? If they're going to prove something in science, it has to comply with the scientific method. And the most important thing is that they've got to prove a cause and an effect relationship, right? So if science is going to prove a cause and effect relationship, then you've got to prove that somehow an orbit is a cause and the effect is the way we see the sun. But you've got to prove that there's a cause and effect relationship there. Otherwise, it's not science. We're at the point now where FE Core are funding this, and they've said, push it as far as you can, get yourself the best quality solicitor and barrister that you can get, which is what I'm currently doing. I'm currently sourcing one with Magic Circle, hopefully Linklaters or Clifford Chance or whatever. Basically, we want to get them in front of a judge, get their evidence on the table to prove the points that they tell us that are true, because and we're prepared to pay for it, because we don't believe that this evidence is actually true. And we believe that everybody's been indoctrinated, and no one realizes that they've been brainwashed. But that is the allegation that we're making, that these children who are now the adults of today, which we're talking to today, we're all brainwashed and by indoctrinated science that isn't actually science, that of a world that doesn't actually exist, and indeed getting taught a reification fallacy. And we're at a point literally now where I'm literally getting the legal team together and picking the right solicitor from the best law firm money can buy in London. And I need to find the right guy. But we're going to test this, and we're going to put the evidence on the table in front of the judge to see whether or not they can prove that there is a 93 million mile away sun.
Are you willing to share what's going to happen next if you get a response?
Well, the next step is something called a letter before action, and our proposed legal route is that we're going to make an application to the High Court for a mandatory injunctions. Now, whether or not you think that we were created by God or otherwise, whether or not you think that we're geocentric, whether or not you think the Earth may indeed be flat, these are the opposing views that should be getting presented, because even if you disagree with them, at least you're aware that it's contentious.
Evidential facts. We're getting taught models, and it feels like, well, if we're going to be taught one model, then you may as well open up the floodgates and you may as well teach us every single model that's going under the sun. But then how much of a waste of time would that be? And I feel like, you know what, one model is one model too many. We only get one shot at life, and we're consuming so much of our time in education being taught a model. And I feel like I've been mugged off. I feel like I've been conned. I wasn't under the impression it was a model. As someone that knows I've been severely lied to in the worst possible way, this has got to be the biggest and the most positive piece of news I've had since I've woke up, that someone is full-blown head-on going to take it to the authorities, going to take it to the system and say, no, this is not on. You're going to have to prove in a court of law that you've actually got some evidence for what you're teaching these kids, myself included.
I mean, it's not going to happen yet, but it'll be within the next month or maybe 6 weeks. There will be a significant issue with regards to a significant disclosure. But the next step that I've got to do is find the right law firm with the right lawyer, solicitor advocate. And once that gets established, then we'll send the letter before action, which they will have 14 days to respond to. I might give them 21. But nonetheless, there will be a letter before action sent. And then at that point, that's the point of committal. That's when we fire the first shot. But if the first answer that's come back from this government official is that it is a scientific fact that the sun is orbited by the Earth, if that's their position so far, it's no different to the debate show in that we hear this from the Globers all the time, and we attack these easily based on the fact that they can't prove their claim, let alone the alternative evidence to the contrary. So we're more than happy with they can't prove their claim in the first place nonsense, because if they can't prove their claim, then that makes the application for the mandatory injunction pretty easy, because we don't in theory have to present any evidence, because we know that they can't prove any of their stuff, any of their claims, but nonetheless, it should be done within 3 months. And in theory, we should be able to get a judgment in our hands that says that the national curriculum is illegal because they're not presenting the balanced representation of opposing views. And if that is the case, that will rewrite science. And that means that we don't have to attack all these Globers on debates. It means that everything changes, and it'll be done pretty much, well, the judgment will be done pretty much overnight. But the actual process of changing it may take some time, because they're going to have to learn what are all these opposing evidence, because we're all stupid now. Not us, them. I think that the standard of evidence in law is much different and more difficult to satisfy than the standard of evidence within science, because it is all based on consensus. It is going to happen pretty quick. It's going to be in the next 3 months, hopefully. Shouldn't take more than 12 months. And it's backed, financially speaking, by FE Core. And basically, it's the perfect storm. So it's so exciting that this is happening, and it's happening now, because in theory, hopefully, this is going to be the game changer that we've been looking for. And if it happens, and I'm part of it, and I instigate it, that'll be my crescendo of my flat Earth journey, because I don't think you're going to get any higher than that, me personally.
Absolutely.
Some people might not see it as the highest point. Other people might see it as proving the next whatever fact in science or whatever. But for me personally, with an angle in law and evidence, if I can get that national curriculum challenged in court, and then they're unable to prove their claims that these things are scientific fact, that to me is my Maslow would argue self-actualization moment. I'll see my work as complete at that point. So watch this space. It's about to get interesting.
I see this as so exciting. It's like a David and Goliath, but I know you've got the slingshot. I know you've got the right aim, and you've got the right sharp stone in that slingshot.
You know what? What I would say is watch this space, because, like I said, this is probably one of the most profound things that we've heard happening within this most important subject. And what are we trying to do in this? We're trying to evoke change and reform that's going in the direction of the truth. So, like Anthony said, watch this space. I think you're all going to be very impressed with what you're going to see happen over the next few months.
Okay, a quick review of Anthony's hijack the education system fantasy. First, there seems to be some disagreement here. Anthony wants to force the government to teach opposing views, whilst Roxanne wants them to stop teaching altogether. Anthony promises a significant disclosure within 14 days. This podcast was uploaded on the 13th of January 2019, by the way. Anthony thinks that all he has to do is send a letter to the education department, and this will force them to have to appear in court and present evidence in support of the answers to Oakley's housekeeping catchphrases. This court case will operate much like Oakley's game show, and all Anthony will have to do is tell the judge that this evidence doesn't comport with Quantum Eraser's personal version of the scientific method, and he will be handed a judgment which will rewrite science overnight. This will happen easily, without Anthony having to present any evidence at all. It will be the crescendo of his flat Earth journey, although some people may see it as him proving the next fact in science. Anthony goes off to find a lawyer, while Roxanne has a fit of entitled arrogance. At least that's what her script said.
Anthony has so gratefully researched enough to actually bring out the sections of the law that they're breaching. We've brought the attention to the Education Department of Parliament, and they've tried to run us round the houses, which Anthony has taken on and run with. And so now that's now moving on. He's seeking legal representation from one of the top law firms in the country, and we're going to take it to the highest court in the land until we get a bunch of people that reckon they're going to prove. We're going to need proof, scientific proof of gravity shown in a courtroom. We're going to need proof of Earth orbiting anything. okay? Just anything. Orbiting anything. We need proof of that. We also need proof of Earth's axis rotation given to us in court. We need proof, scientific proof, of course, scientific proof of curvature, scientific proof of a 93 million mile away sun, scientific proof of how we can have a gas pressure in a vacuum of space. That'd be interesting to see them do in a courtroom. And we also want scientific proof of a self-perpetuating molten iron core shown in court. And if anyone else has got anything they want to throw in there, we'll be more than happy to take your request in. You know, send your self-addressed envelope to PO Box. Flat Earth Globe.com.
I think that's a pretty good list. I think you got a good list there. Yeah,
that's a good
but
list.
Listen, if they can give us those 7 scientific proofs, we'll eat our hats. But hear what? We all know, you know, as well as I know, none of those evidential scientific proofs are going to be brought to a courtroom. So we need to stop teaching and propagating and pushing the the Copernicus model as if it's fact. It needs to be taught to children as if it's fact. Listen, if you're going to teach one model, then you better teach them all or teach none at all.
Yeah.
And we're going with the whole, well, do you want to teach them all? No, I didn't think you wanted to. So stop teaching any. Okay? Just stop it.
Obviously, Roxanne feels that since she clearly learned nothing at school, no one else should either. Meanwhile, Anthony has found a lawyer. Well, maybe.
So yesterday I had my first conversation that was detailed with a law firm. And they haven't agreed to take the case on yet because they want to look into it, but they want to know more. And we had our first cards on the table thing. And basically what the issue is the hardest point is to get across to the lawyers that what we're trying to say is that they can't prove their case. We're not trying to say that the Earth's flat. So that's the bit that we've got to not put in it. We've got to say that their case can't be proven within science or to a standard that a judge would accept. Now, the problem is when we show the counter evidence to show why their evidence is wrong and it's not proving the point that they're making, then it instantly creates the impression that you think that the Earth's flat. We also had an issue over the credibility of witnesses because they've got 150 PhDs on tap. Basically, we're going to be going up against the scientific consensus of 150 PhDs against maybe 3. And that in itself is a bit of an issue because if it literally comes down to the whole scientific body of evidence, the way that Rumpus describes it, then a judge is more likely to be persuaded by that. So we were trying to say to the law firm, look, focus on what it doesn't do rather than how strong it is. Because if it doesn't do what they tell us it doesn't matter how strong it is then. So it's going to be like Nathan's show in the sense that if we say that doesn't prove the point that you're saying it does, then they're going to say, well, on what basis? And then we'll say, well, it doesn't manipulate the independent variable, for example. It falls outside of science. And it's that level that we're aiming at because the law firm that we've got at the minute are really skeptical because what they want to be able to do is let the evidence fall with the experts and then let the experts argue out between themselves. And we're saying it's the experts that's the problem. So that's where we're at. And it was a detailed conversation, and they're not totally on board with us yet. They're definitely not on board. They're 50-50 at best because this is going to be landmark. This is going to be really, really important. But it's training the law firm that we're working with at the minute, who may not actually survive. It's training them to see it the way that we see it, to argue it the way we argue it, and then use that as the leverage to prove that they can't prove the case because it's not going like that at the minute. We're having this real psychological battle. It's like having a baller in the Hangouts with Nathan, but the baller is actually the law firm because they're influenced very easily by the narrative and they're not influenced by the counter. It's totally semantic. And ultimately, I'd hate to be the judge involved in trying to work their way through this because it's going to be horrible.
Is this attorney just as good as you are to represent these matters, or
no? That's the big problem.
Yeah,
because I mean, you've been there with Nathan's show. How many times have we had it where literally?
A long time.
Yeah, they don't get it. The ballers do not get it.
Real quick, Riley, do you think it would be possible to be able to train, able to argue these things the way you can? Because I mean,
I don't know. Do you mean
it's going to be tough, man?
What we need to do really is we need to get the lawyer. If once we find if this lawyer is no good to us and we end up going elsewhere, then what we really need is the lawyer that we end up taking on to literally sit on Nathan's debates for a couple of shows and listen to how things are argued, and basically put cross-reference what he listens to on the debates into the legal situation, and then getting the same result, but through doing it, transposing it into the way the legal mechanism works. So even if they can prove Cavendish is true, then all we need to do is flip open that article from Scientific America that states that it's not the current science anymore. So then the whole argument's in the bin. So it's knowing which are the strongest counter arguments. And honest to God, like I say, the hardest thing is getting our legal people at the moment to understand that they can't prove their case, and we know all the answers, but they don't understand that we know the answers to give them. So we're probably likely to fall foul with the law firm, because they're going to think, fucking hell, this is too much for me to remember, because they've got to argue it in court, right? Someone's got to argue these things on the fly there and then in front of the judge, and we're the ones that need to be able to. We're the ones that can do that, but they're the ones that have got to do it, not us, because we're not allowed to speak. So it's like they're the ones that have got to be up to speed, and we just know that in itself, you kind of got. It's not just employing them to do a job. You've got to red pill these bastards to make sure that they're up to speed. And how are they going to do that? Yeah, that paper is part of this course that I'm doing, right? And that is what I write in that paper is going to end up being used in the court, because once we get something published scientifically within the peer review process, that's then got evidential weight to it. So it's really important what I put in that paper, because if we're going to end up using it, then it's going to have to be, once it's in the system, we can then cite it, because it becomes open to peer review. And unless somebody proves that the point's wrong, then it's seen as being credible. I mean, I've got until summer to submit it. And I was intending on sticking it in basically now, because I'm pretty much finished with it. But I'm also thinking, actually, if I put this in now, the direction that this case may go may end up not being the direction that I've written the paper in, and it may end up be better off just hanging back a little bit and seeing the direction that it looks like it's going in, and then tailoring it to that. What we're going to do, I'm going to run it by Nathan. If this law firm stays on board and we don't end up like disagreeing and just walking away, I'm going to tell them that they're going to have to come into some of the hangouts and look at what we're doing. But I'm also going to have to tell Nathan that he needs to tone it down a little bit, just while we, like keeping it modern in terms of its most up to date. But don't be too aggressive with them, because if we are being watched by our own side, then we need to present ourselves in our best, most polite, courteous way to create the right impression. Because we couldn't have them with like the Rumpus, for example, who just will not let us respond, and then Nathan barking at him, telling him to shut up, you old man, and whatever. We can't really do that, so we'll have to just pick hangouts.
And Nathan knows some people just want to charge him up, because that's like their way of trying to bring him down.
Yeah, of course.
Poor Nathan. Of course, court cases involving complex technical and scientific issues make use of experts in the relevant field. As usual, Anthony considers that the best person to assume this role is himself. But he doesn't stop there. He also intends to train a lawyer from the best law firm money can buy by getting them to come on Oakley's game show. He also thinks he can convince a court to reject the concept of gravity by quoting them a single sentence from Scientific American, which he has misunderstood. Now, you may be forgiven for forgetting that the point to all this was for Anthony to attain a master's in law. The problems that his tutor pointed out right at the start haven't gone away, and so she emails him with her advice on what he needs to change to stand a chance of getting the qualification. To Anthony and his absurdly inflated ego, this is just another thing he needs to debate.
So our first point was there's a lack of supervisory capacity on the topic, in that they don't have any academics who specialise in education law. So my response was, that's okay. I don't need a specialist in education law. I would actually argue that I am the specialist. I don't feel as though I need supervision on this matter when I've got all the background that in this topic, generally speaking, that I need already. The second point is that the topic is still too much education policy rather than education law. And I said, no. There is no policy in here at all. It is all to do with Section 10, Section 406, and Section 407 of the Education Act 1996. I do not reference policy at any point. So for whatever reason, she thinks there's education policy in there. Could be a red herring. could be a straw man, but nonetheless, it was dismissed on the basis that there's no policy in there whatsoever. I'm not interested in the policy. It's all about the actual legislation. So she's wrong there. She's either innocently got a misunderstanding, or she's trolling me with a baller kind of comment. But there's no policy in there whatsoever. The third point she makes is that the research questions are mostly not legal in nature. And I said, no, the Dimmock case, although it is the only case here, means that the research questions are limited, but does not mean it is not legal in nature. It's the application of the Dimmock case overlapping with the legislation that is what I will be focusing on. So the research questions are not mostly legal in nature. Well, the research questions are simple. There's only 3 parts to it. Is it political? Is it partisan? Is it promotion? What research is the necessary in those 3 words? And then the final one is there is a complete lack of legal resources in the topic form. Is this perhaps why it's indicative of a study not being legal in nature? And I said, no, it's because there is a barrier between science and law. Science acts as a law unto itself and has been passively indoctrinating education for years with pseudoscience masked as science when it isn't at all. The Copernican model is taught to children as fact. It has no scientific validity. The legal point is whether or not this is lawful or not. And then I continued and I said, I'm here on this course to challenge current intellectual thinking as per the documentation in the brochure. I know exactly what I'm going to do. I will be putting a cat in amongst the pigeons because science is not a law unto itself, and it is illegal to promote partisan politics as per the decision in Dimmock under Section 406 of the Act. The short version is that I've had the resistance back saying why I should consider potentially doing something else, and I've said back to them I'm doing it. I've got my first copy ready done. Do you want to read it? And I've not had a response yet. So this is the resistance I was expecting, and it's in writing now. So it's a case of, well, I'm doing this and I'm not changing my mind. Let's either support me with it or I'll just do it myself. She's wrote back and said, I'm not prepared to deal with this because I don't think that you'll pass your exams. So I'm referring the matter up to the head of law. She's invited me to write to the head of law to state my case. And I'm like, well, I don't really actually need to state my case. My position is I'm carrying on doing my work unless I'm told that I'm not to do so. So at the moment, the head of law is now involved. And when I look into this guy's credentials, he's got more legal writing than anybody I've ever seen. He's written shed loads of articles on different elements of law. And I'm going to suggest that he could be my supervisor because he seems to be extremely well written in legal writing. And I'd quite like him to be my mentor, actually, my supervisor. So I've switched it round and said, I want you to be my supervisor. So let's just see what happens. So they've got to really kick me off the course. Otherwise, I'm doing this, but they definitely don't want me to be doing it. So watch this space. It's all going to get interesting in the next week. So if they fail it, I will release the reasons for why. And then when you read through it yourself and you can see, well, does that satisfy the reasons for failing it? And the answer is going to be, well, no, because the law is there. There's evidence there. There's supporting cases, there's supporting journal references, and it is clearly an issue. And why would it fail? It shouldn't fail. And they're just closing ranks on me and stopping me from doing it. Now, contractually, they're not going to be able to. Professionally, they may end up making it fail. And I think that they will. I think they're going to fail it. So again, this is something that you can quote me on, ballers. I think that they will fail my work because they don't want it to pass.
I also think they'll fail Anthony's work because it's poorly written and it makes an illogical and nonsensical attempt at a legal argument. Okay, time for the final showdown with the head of law.
But on the other hand, what I've also done by coincidence at the same time, I applied for a PhD level qualification at a different university, assuming obviously that I would get through this one, and the application's in. But it'll be a really interesting paradox if the new university accepts my application for a PhD, but then the current one refuses to let me write the topic on when my proposal for my PhD is the same topic. It's the indoctrination of the education system, citing the same law, the same case, the same issues with the Copernican model. So it's going to be really interesting whether or not I get onto the PhD, but then get kicked off this, because that's going to cause the murder, because they've deprived me my place on a potential PhD if I get a conditional offer. I'm going to share on screen. I'm going to read it. Dear Mr. Riley, thank you for your email. The award of LLM, which is the Masters in Law, will, require you to undertake a substantive piece of research on a legal topic which the law school is in a position to supervise. My colleague, Dr. Blah Blah, has already indicated that the suggested research is not something that we can supervise. I would therefore kindly revisit the research and provide a title which we will be able to supervise you on. So that was his first. This is the head of the law school. It's been pushed up from the teacher to the head of the law school, right? This is my response to him. Dear sir, thank you for your email. I am not prepared to provide an alternative title on this occasion. I do not agree that there is a lack of supervision from a university of PhD academics specifically skilled in legal research. It is a clear contradiction to claim there is no supervision of sufficient skill, yet also claim that the angle in law is too shallow. You cannot have it both ways. I respectfully reassert my position. For the avoidance of doubt, you will have to breach your contract with me. I do not agree there is a lack of supervision. So that was my response back. Got a response just outside of office hours, which I'll get to quickly. And he sent it on his mobile, which tells me that the guy's triggered. So I'll now share the picture on screen. Let me bring OBS back up because it dropped. Dear Mr. Riley, thank you for your email. We have made our position clear regarding the learning outcomes of an LLM. We have also advised you as to the supervision of a title that lacks legal dimension. But again, contradiction. And then he says, I hope this finalises the matter. And then he signs it off. But listen to my next one. My next one is fantastic. Here we go. This is the redacted, my response back to him. I said, again, thank you for your swift reply. Respectfully, I have made mine clear too. I do not accept a university full of PhD academics and not considered to be adequate supervision for the purposes of checking my legal research. The matter is final as far as I'm concerned. I will continue with my work as outlined in my project document. Perhaps it would be prudent to actually take my work and critique that, then tell me how it's shallow in law, or beyond the expertise of a whole school of PhD academics in law. You might be surprised, or deem my work so terrible that it cannot possibly pass. Alternatively, I told you in an earlier email that I had applied for a PhD in law on the exact same topic, indoctrination within the education. It won't be long before I get their decision. Perhaps it would be premature to act adversely against me at this time, particularly if my research proposal is accepted by a PhD course from a different university that I am quite sure have no dedicated education experts. I have checked, none seem to exist. I think my two suggestions are reasonable in the situation, but, as I said in my opening email, the ball is in your court. Can we agree to either wait until my application for the PhD on the same topic is accepted or refused, or see if my work is as below par as anticipated by academics without any expertise to know whether or not it is or not? So that was my response. Now, you got to be really careful with how you word this stuff, because I don't want to piss the guy off. But I also want to tell him that I'm not doing what the fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. That's what I want to say to him, because I'm not doing it. Because I want to do it on the topic that I choose to do it on, and my angle in law is definitely not shallow when there's already case law. So the law's there is case law, and I'm doing it, and I'm happy to run the risk with it because I believe that the education system is going to do everything it can to try and stop me. But at the end of the day, they've got a commercial contract with me to basically to submit my work. That's basically all they've got to do. And I'm kicking ass with it, and they don't like it because they don't want the topic to be linked to their university, presumably, or I'm not quite sure what the reasons will be, but I'm sure it'll be to do with the reputation. But I don't give a shit. I've paid my fees. My fees are paid. They've got to deliver me that contractual right to submit my work. If they're going to take some adverse action against me, I hope they kick me off. That's what I really want them to do, because that'll be the worst thing that they can do.
It sounds to me as if Anthony was longing to be kicked off the course. Then he could claim flat earth martyrdom, with him and his ideas the victims of a corrupt and overbearing state. This also has the added advantages of no possibility of failure and no effort being required to achieve it. So this brings us pretty much up to date. Anthony eventually submitted his paper with no further support from the university, and now he awaits the results. Despite two legal professionals pointing out that his arguments are ridiculous, he continues to flog this dead horse. a novice student arrogantly ignoring the advice of those who are clearly qualified, experienced and accomplished in their legal careers. I guess if, as a completely inexperienced layman, you spent 2 years telling yourself almost everyone who calls themselves a scientist is doing it wrong, and you know better, it's no great leap to extend this idea to include the entire legal profession too. The final point that I want to make is that these legal arguments are entirely irrelevant. Even if they were in themselves sound, they would never see a courtroom, at least until the correct process had been followed. Anthony is arguing that an opposing view should be taught. The problem is, he has no opposing view to offer. He complains that what is taught doesn't comport with quantum eraser's distorted view of the scientific method, and yet he has nothing supporting his worldview that comports with any method at all, unless we count making shit up in the Skype call before the show as a method. The young Earth creationists, who Anthony now seems to be aligning himself with, although equally lacking in peer-reviewed science, at least have school textbooks and curricula to support the teaching of their ideas. Anthony doesn't even have a coherent idea. Changes in the science curriculum will come as a result of changes in science, and changes in science are the result of lengthy and systematic processes of gathering and repeatedly testing data to eventually formulate tentative conclusions, which are then subjected to professional public scrutiny and challenge. No reasonable person can expect to shortcut this process with a win it before the commercial break court case. Even if Anthony had this kind of scientific backing, the route to changes in the national curriculum would still not be a legal one. From time to time, the national curriculum is reviewed and altered. The review process includes public consultation, where someone like Anthony would have the opportunity to have their view heard. The last changes occurred in 2014, and these came as the result of a 3-year process of review, which included, for instance, these 2 reports, which are several hundreds of pages long and are a detailed study of the curricula and teaching methods in the highest performing jurisdictions around the world. These documents represent many thousands of hours of detailed professional research, and these are just 2 of the many reports and data that were considered by the panel of educational and industry experts who eventually formulated our current national curriculum. This is the reality of how changes in the national curriculum actually occur, as a result of careful consideration at the end of a lengthy and detailed evidence-gathering process, not because some chancer on YouTube fancies himself as a bit of a lawyer. Thanks for watching. Please rate, comment and subscribe.